Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending the event today. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes before we get started to let a few more attendees join into the session. For those who haven't used this platform before, there is a chat segment where you can have conversation with other attendees, including myself. And then there's separately a questions section where you can put questions if you have any for the speaker. Just to reiterate, we'll get started in just another moment or two. Let's say probably 2 to 3 minutes. We'll get started. Thank you very much. For those who just joined, so you don't have to check your sound, we are just waiting a couple minutes as additional people attend the session. And so it'll be about another minute or two. We'll get started. Thank you very much for your patience. Just about 1 more minute, we'll get started. Again, just leaving a little time for additional people to join. Thank you for your patience. All right, I think we'll get started. Thank you everyone for attending. I'm excited to introduce today a presentation which is labeled Real World Experience. So we've got Tara Castleberry on the line who is going to speak to a real project, and it really touches on a key element that we see at our clients at Mega, that application portfolio management, highly popular, highly valuable. Where do we go from here? How can we expand on that success and build additional value? So we're going to speak to maximizing the value of your application portfolio management practice with risk and compliance. And again, it's a real world scenario, so I'm very excited. If we can go to the next slide. Again, happy to introduce Tara Castleberry, someone I've had the pleasure of working with for a number of years now at different clients of Mega. Expert in the technology space with over 30 years. Now the CEO of Creo Technology, helping clients to implement essentially what we're talking about today. It's really building on and increasing the value of application portfolio management. You can see a series of other roles and titles that Tara's held, a vast knowledge that she shares, and we're excited to have her participate today. So Tara, I'll hand it over to you, and I look forward to hearing the conversation. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Dan. So enterprise architecture really kind of became that we do not speak of. And what's interesting is the evolution of the role into a leader and a mentor. I pulled two quotes out to kind of highlight that. Albert Einstein once said, "The leader is one who out of clutter brings simplicity, and out of discord, harmony, and out of difficulty, opportunity." We as enterprise architects are typically wired to be focused on simplicity, harmony, and identifying opportunities. But then astrophysicist Carl Sagan had said, well, we live in this society that's absolutely dependent on science and technology, but we've cleverly arranged things so that almost no one understands the science and technology. And that's the prescription for a disaster. So if we take those two different views, a leader about creating the simplicity, the harmony, and the opportunity, and a mentor who actually ensures that more folks understand the science and technology, we start to evolve the role of an enterprise architect. Let's move forward. So we're seeing a convergence, and I think you're starting to see it in the various quadrants and assessments of technology platforms that are occurring. There's a convergence of enterprise architecture and risk management. So enterprise architecture, we know it's a discipline. It's about proactively and holistically leading enterprise responses, really focused on mitigating disruptive forces through identification and analysis, and the execution of change toward desired business vision and outcomes. Oftentimes, the practical application of that is difficult at best. And we do tend to drive into our IT portfolio management capabilities, application inventories, very technology facing. So we have those common enterprise architecture use cases where it is about ecosystem transparency, it's about architecture and technology debt, and then transformation. Hey, we want to go to the cloud, or we want to execute on opportunities for improvement. Pocket value propositions, but certainly disallows in many cases kind of a holistic adoption. So the real value of mega and the meta model that it brings to us and that enterprise architecture discipline is the collaboration holistically. So bringing more resources into the party. When we think about digital asset rationalization, again, a typical use case. If we start to change our mind, or we start to communicate enterprise architecture a little bit differently, we realize that when we do enterprise architecture well, we do risk management really well, and vice versa. So if we consider enterprise architecture as a risk manager or an advisor or an innovator, we start to realize the value proposition of being able to ensure readiness, recovery, and resiliency, expanding those business-facing opportunities, and enabling optimization through artificial intelligence, whether that's automation or assessment, this constant cultivation. So keep that in mind. There is a convergence. When we're standing in front of an audience, it's very difficult to say, I'm an enterprise architect, and here's what I do. I have struggled for years, more than 10, trying to articulate what I actually do. There is really a difficult hallway conversation or elevator pitch. So I've found that using risk management really gravitates toward a different audience, which ironically enough has opened up new doors. So let's move forward. So setting the context, I recently accepted a client about a year ago, and we've been working with this client closely. It's a new mid-size insurance company born from a global firm divestiture. What does that mean? There is technology debt. There's unnecessary complexity. There's profound work effort and change fatigue in an effort trying to move over to economies of scales, taking a cloud-first approach. But there's also ongoing merger and acquisitions, as well as the desire to take the firm into a public state through an initial public offering. Not unlike many organizations that we've provided advisory services and engagement services for, the executive sponsorship, well, it's embracing cloud first and zero trust principles. There's this mind for rapid growth, and there's very different personalities and different perspectives. So we have a forward-thinking and innovative CEO, CIO, CISO, data-driven, cloud-focused, multi-year visions, but very fluid requirements. We know what it looks like, we know what it feels like, but those requirements are not going to be set in stone. We have a chief risk officer and a chief financial officer, very practical, very pragmatic. They are design focused, have very solid requirements, but their vision evolves based on learning new ways of working or new application of technology. And then, as it often can be in your operations space, we have a COO who's very traditional thinking, very structured, operational focused. When problems occur, tends to be a tactical solution, never an issue. As long as you take that tactical solution, where maybe we're applying bubblegum and Band-Aids, and moving that into a strategic delivery. So definitely there are general requirements, but there tends to be that siloed thought process. So as we approach these engagements, it's really important for us to understand we have to get to know our audience, but we have to go a step further and really understand their motivations. A chief financial officer and a risk officer, very logical, very practical, very matter of fact. CEOs, CIOs, and CISOs, they dream the dreams and have these great visions. And your COOs are, we've got to get the business done. So you tend to do, this is how I've always gotten the business done. So again, understanding those motivations and the audience really helps to kind of drive different ways to expanding what I argue are enterprise architecture services. But remember, it is that we do not speak of. Marketing enterprise architecture is still that tricky bit. So let's step forward. So addressing multiple personalities, I do try to sprinkle in humor when I'm faced with challenges. We do have to address multiple personalities. I would argue that there's some psychological warfare that needs to occur, and definitely behavior modification. All of that ties into really the approach that we at Creo Tech Services take. We know that we need to engage resources at a holistic level. And so the way we approached this particular use case was demonstrating the art of the possible. And we did this through enterprise-wide demonstrations, and we did a paid pilot really to isolate where the highest priority outcomes and greatest motivation was. We did end up with, enterprise-wide engagement that was not fully engaged. However, we did have enough interest and enough engagement to at least approach this from a 50,000 foot level and holistically take it down different levels. Our phase 1 implementation is really focused on the key building blocks or puzzle pieces to maximize the business problem resolution. So having years of working with the mega platform, that meta model that is the underbelly of the beast really is what enables us to connect the dots. As architects or even as risk management resources, we recognize that everything is intrinsically connected. So as a result, the idea becomes, if we focus on those building blocks or those puzzle pieces, we can actually start to connect the dots. So you take your application and technology portfolio and lifecycle management disciplines. Now we know that we've got some of those key building blocks in the apps and the techs and the organizational structures, even the functions and capabilities. Those are pretty common things that we can address with an uncustomized application record. Then when you roll in regulatory frameworks, risks, policies, standards, controls, we understand the layers of those, or we desperately try to. From a regulatory perspective, they come in and say, this is what you should be doing. We define risks associated with that, but your policies are demonstrating how the firm itself is adhering to those regulatory requirements. Standards really seek to standardize how it is that we're doing that. And then the controls is where those audit firms will come in and they test and validate that we are mitigating those risks. Our phase 2 approach is really use case driven. Given now that we have the key building blocks or those puzzle pieces, we can start to drive multi-year, multidiscipline approaches to the maturation and broader adoption of the platform. So now we can start considering things like we've got apps and techs. What things are we concerned about? Maybe it's the authentication method. Maybe it's the way that data is moving through integrations. We can start to apply technology risk ranking or rating. We can start to better manage the regulatory obligations, the control objectives, and those controls. We can start to see how those regulatory obligations branch and relate to our internal policies, standards, and even if we're focused on just IT, those IT general controls, the big ones like access management, change management, that which we are absolutely held accountable to. We can also start to report on aggregated control KPI measurements. So as opposed to doing things in a manual intensive way or publishing, quarterly white papers or all of the reports that we need to produce to enterprise risk organizations, if we're driving from value propositions, we start to see we have all of this information, we have all of this data. How can we embrace the art of the possible and do a push button magic? Here's your report. We can also start to mature and standardize how we're tracking major incidents, action plans, doing so with consistency. This is going to allow us not only to identify those incidents and action plans, but to publish those back to key constituents or those that do, conduct the reviewing, internal auditors, internal compliance teams, It really does kind of take that vision of a one-stop centralized platform and really enables kind of that collective and collaborative cultivation. Business continuity, there's often this big silo between technology and IT. We know that business typically owns that business continuity, but one of my first, engagements in one of the larger insurance firms was really, gosh, every time they would come out with their business impact assessments, it would be this blank template, or it would be a template I filled out last year, and it wouldn't contain applications that I knew I used. So I had to go through this brain dumping process of, what do I actually use? Gosh, how is the rest of the business doing this? Well, within Mega, especially in your application portfolio management, you have inventories of applications. That becomes a very small opportunity that helps to assist in that business continuity effort, if only by providing the viable data and that standardized data that we can then bounce a business impact assessment against, that will help further the maturity of what we know about an application and risks specific to them. So if we step into our next slide, really kind of drawing a holistic picture. So I talked about, if we take it from a 50,000 foot level, we see the entire Mega platform. And then how do we target that in a way where we can start to see some of those holistic organizational hooks? And we did so in our pilot phase in the light green indicated by the number ones. We thought, let's go ahead and touch the business capabilities, bring that into the business, touching on business architecture, laser focused on applications and technologies, spinning down a little bit into the installation and technical architecture, and out again into those regulation frameworks, risks, and controls. We also did opt to embrace two data subscriptions, one with UCF, the regulatory frameworks. They change all the time. They constantly have directive changes. So we knew that, opposed to going out and fishing for those from NIST or from COBIT or NYDFS or even Delaware, the different regulating bodies, through UCF, we can integrate those very quickly. And following an initial effort of relating that back to internal policy standards and controls, you start to see the whole picture in a dendrogram. The other one where is a real win that comes in, it's very difficult, a huge manual effort, is the management of technology and application life cycles. So as we move toward vendor solutions, vendors absolutely communicate their life cycles. But if you're in an organization that has 3,000 plus applications and or technologies, they tend to explode on the technology side. Managing that, again, becomes a very daunting effort. So ITpedia enables us to not only rationalize, but also organize our technologies in a standard manner and brings down those life cycles into our technology portfolio inventory. As we step into phase 3 in our use case-based approaches, you'll notice that in steps 1 and 2, we've really articulated those building blocks or puzzle pieces. And as we step into phase 3, we've really set the stage, and we have some of the foundational pieces that are going to hold and help us with the relation and further expansion of what it is that we're doing in those use case value propositions. So as opposed to stepping into meetings with our resources and saying, well, what do you need? We can actually say, here's what we have. What are you doing today? And then it starts, we've already brought them to a level that we can build upon. So again, our holistic approach was really about setting a holistic enterprise-wide kind of a foundation so that the use cases, no matter how diverse they are, when they come in, we can approach them and those building blocks are in place. So let's step forward. So if we think about it, from enterprise architecture to IRM, that building on the IT foundation. So if we think about the quadrants, right, when we assess different products, for years and years, I've always seen this common denominator with governance, risk, and compliance and enterprise architecture. I think naturally that's why I became bifurcated in my skill set, but it was a common pattern. So the architect in me prevailed. And if we think about enterprise risk management, the puzzle pieces are the building blocks that we need. It's apps, techs, orgs, capabilities. If we simply enrich that now with risks and policies, we are now providing a viable service to enterprise risk management. The same holds true for compliance management. We've got the apps, techs, and the org units. Now we start to look at not only the risks and the policies, but we expand that a little bit further to the regulations, where we have some kludgy type regulations that compliance teams are always really trying to tie to. This is where we have a pathway or a runway to bring compliance management folks in. If we step forward, audit management. Now, audit management is always a fun one. So one of my favorite hats to wear is an audit annihilation hat. Sometimes it's a little pinchy. Standing in front of regulators and auditors is part of the function that I perform for clients. And truly in doing so, internal audit, making friends and really using them as your testing base, as, validate what I think is good. But also on that IT side, we're seeing evolutions where the internal audit teams may not understand what they're doing to the depth because the pace of technology change is occurring so quickly. In order to do this in that audit management space, again, you've got your apps and your techs. They're always looking for, what am I testing? You bring in your risks and your controls, and now you're bringing a holistic picture to them in a common way that can also be expanded into business use cases. And the GRC and security's big. It's constantly changing. When we think about IT, governance, risk, and compliance, and then bringing the security pieces in, again, apps and techs, we care. We also care about apps and techs and how they relate to infrastructure. You tie on your risks, your controls, your policies, and your regulations, and all of a sudden you really start to understand where ISO and COBIT and NIST have overlap. You start to see where SOC, GDPR, PCI, data permissions, data security, cyber rules, NYDFS, all of this really starts to relate. And again, those foundational building blocks are the same. So if we step forward, vendor risk management, which is also fun. So we also need the ability to say, these are the vendors we do business with. These are their internal controls. We're validating that if we're using SaaS environments, using cloud-based deployments, it's really important that their SOC 2s, that their PCI certifications, that those are in place, because we can't certify them on their own. It's not our controls, but we do want to ensure that their controls are well managed. So as the business models start to change from that centralized to decentralized model, again, apps, techs, and give me my vendors. Third-party risk management is a very important discipline, especially in that risk management, broader umbrella. You tie your risks and controls. Again, you start to be able to extend and validate that the standard or the bar you have set for your firm is adhered to by third-party vendors in a standardized manner and in a consistent, repeatable way. And I'm always going to fall back to this business continuity. Business continuity is such a big deal. And while on the technology side, it's very easy for us to say, yep, I've done a disaster recovery test and we're good. I can recover. We do lightly look at RTO and RPO and making sure we're recovering in a timely manner. But oftentimes the business and their organizations or business units are competing for prioritization of a finite amount of IT resources. So the business continuity, again, you've got your apps, your techs, your vendors, and your capabilities. We start to see those common patterns. Roll it out with your controls, your regulations, and action plans specifically from prior tests and determining that we ran into a collision or sequencing was out of snuff. Again, we have the foundation building blocks. We're simply expanding on that use case to bring broader value more holistically. So if we step into the last slide, the secret sauce really becomes the pro tips. I am a world-class meddler. I learned this early on. My background really started with development where I was in a box, in a dark room, sometimes with techno music and black lights. And it killed me because I'm a social butterfly as well. So I started meddling and asking questions, turning on automation, ensuring that when an issue did occur that woke me up in the middle of the night as a developer or even as an operations resource, that I was, really focused on not only solving that, but stepping back a little bit further and recognizing that everything is intrinsically connected, looking at that use case and looking at that intrinsic linkage and tying that back to the ecosystem. And then communicating the ecosystem in business relevant terminology. There is an art to this. I, used to beat myself up because I did not speak languages. I took Spanish 3 years in a row. I still do not speak Spanish. I tried other languages and it simply did not sink into my brain. Not for not trying. I had an opportunity to go into the data center as I was leading a critical data asset program and had to work with multiple engineering disciplines. And what I realized as I was saying, it's very simple. All I need you to do is say these configuration items from an ITIL, kind of configuration management perspective. I need those linked back to an application, a business application, where I could then say, these are your owners, these are who care, these are the capabilities it's supporting. And I didn't realize that the problem with me picking up another language as I spoke web engineering, database engineering, several different languages that were very technical in nature. So again, business terminology is just like that. It is essentially learning a different language. You'll find that auditors speak in terms of controls, regulators in terms of control objectives, policy standards. You get into that engineering space, and our boys and girls are down there. They know how the bits and bytes are moving, and so it is about bubbling it up, coming to that common language. So becoming a trusted advisor is also tricky as well, especially when you're fighting an age-old dilemma, which is I am IT and you are the business. And too often there's this perception that IT, or the business, right, is the tail wagging the dog, or vice versa. It's really important to understand the business problems, again, from the business perspective and in their context. I lead with questions. I typically have some branching logic to my questions depending on a response. It's also really important that we are using our listening skills, not one of my superpowers unless everybody's on mute. Being able to sit back and listen and really understand the problem, giving them some terms and ways of talking about it, but also embedding yourself in not trying to solve world peace. So as enterprise architects, we tend to really drive toward, I need economies of scale, I need to reduce the complexity. There really is a value in being a part of the solution through practical delivery. And if you deliver iterative solutions that improve the business's ways of working, you're going to be the first person they call. Too often I've worked in environments and there's ebbs and flows. There's years when the investment in technology and the investment in business budgets are very fruitful. There's years where it's very thin and you're barely holding it together on a shoestring budget, trying to hang on to staff and make them more efficient and effective. That trusted advisor is not say we need to go find a new point, shiny point solution, or I refer to it as shiny new tricycles. Oftentimes it's, hey, what do we have and how can we solve that? As Teams rolled out and M365 and became very valuable, prior to that being all cloud deployed, I remember saying, gosh, are you familiar with OneNote? And putting in notebooks and collaborating off of those. SharePoint, again, these are common collaboration, oftentimes not necessarily embraced in the right way. And then if we think about it, we've got that change fatigue and that constant change. So the business is desperately trying to do their job in ways that they're accustomed to doing it. We can demonstrate to them, very simple ways that all of a sudden, they're saying, oh gosh, I didn't even know I had this. So not only becoming a trusted advisor, but stepping into that, how do you sprinkle in magic? Where do you get that wow effect? Demonstrating the art of the possible is really it. And that's what they need to see. if you listen, and you're leading with questions and you understand the business problem, they'll absolutely say, well, here's what I do. They will show you their manual work efforts. They'll let you shadow them and sit behind them. The more time you spend, you're bridging the gap in the language barrier. You're building that trust. And now you're finding those opportunities for iterative wins and automate those where able. Show them how to collaborate, in a OneNote, demonstrate how they can all work in a document, but also, there's caveats to that. So definitely share the knowledge and the wisdom as opposed to, oh, direct this to a ticket or go to our service desk. Oftentimes, the bridge that you need when the right resource is reaching out to you, that is the simple bridge that you need where you can very quickly show them something amazing and you're opening up a channel and building a bridge that they're going to continue to cross. Now, again, keeping that boundary is also important as well. If it is a common service desk break fix, make sure you're shifting it the right way, but don't turn away from those opportunities to bring magic through innovation. Those discussions around point solutions, I am here to tell you as an architect, it would drive me crazy. They would come in, heavy on the insurance space. They would come in and, hey, we need a new payment platform. Okay. And then I would turn around. Is there a reason why we can't use one of the 15 we have? Maybe we could talk to those folks and what do we like, not like, so that ongoing rationalization. Don't turn away from the point solutions. It's actually great intro points where you have an opportunity as enterprise architects to say, we have all of this. Now, sometimes you do run into walls because the mindset of the individual, they want to use a very particular tool because they've used it in the past and they're comfortable with it. And then that's where your psychological warfare comes in, or you can propose a very short tail. Let us demonstrate the art of the possible, get you some introductions to the folks that are managing those other payment platforms as an example. And then, so engaging in those discussions around the point solutions, again, you start to understand the current picture. Believe it or not, you're going to step into some of that shadow IT. I can't tell you how many times where my business partners make me cry with the magic that they have with Excel. Excel is still an unstructured document type. Very difficult to consume that data, control that data. It's not a database. So when we think about our IT general controls, helping the business partners on that journey is really key. Speaking their language, building that trust, and then demonstrating what we can do. Another opportunity that's been really common for me when I think about some of the challenges, you've got your IT town halls, you've got, broader organization-wide town halls, but celebration of those wins. So you have collaborative wins where it may be multi-organization in your IT space. And sometimes when those are celebrated, it's celebrated by the team that managed that project. And oftentimes it misses inclusion of all of those supporting resources. So it's really important that when you celebrate those wins together, you're also going to start creating this, gosh, we want to work with them. They recognized what I did. It was valuable to them. And so that's where one of my pro tips is always, always have a solid intake process. Make it so that you can break it down very quickly. You can be responsive and you can prioritize, hey, we know that we're closer to this because we're working on these three other efforts. Let's bring this team in. You can rapidly prioritize. You can rapidly start to see those holistic opportunities to bring different efforts together. And oftentimes your little if efforts on point solutions or just doing the little iterations, it truly is an iteration that's feeding into a broader strategy that likely is not being communicated at a level that folks are understanding or in a language that folks can relate to. Folks that understand how they're contributing to the strategic delivery at the top of the house have this awesome new sense of motivation and drive and engagement that you really aren't going to see through what I would call, traditional recognition programs. It's the ability to make a difference and become a part of that solution and engage with folks that you don't typically talk to. It can be scary. They are speaking a different language. But if we step back as architects and say, gosh, what do we sound like to those that don't understand technology? I think you start to realize we just need to shuffle around in their shoes. And so some of these pro tips have really been valuable as we've embarked in some of these missions, typically, if not always, coming from an IT focused space and really trying to create a bridge in that initial implementation to bring the business motivations in with the technology must haves and start to bridge the gap. So there we go. If we step forward, I think we have time, Dan, to open it up to questions.
Perfect. So for me, there's a common question that I hear from architects in looking at the way that you presented the information. And you entered pieces of it, but how do I start? So let's assume for a second I've got the portfolio management. You mentioned two perspectives of maybe asking what they need or even showing them what you have and saying, here's what I've got. And what are you guys doing today? But how do I even get to that conversation? How do I open that dialogue? How do you find the stakeholders, for example, and then knock on the doors?
Dare I say, start with those auditors? So if you think about it, auditors are coming in not only to look in your shop, but they're also looking across the business units. They struggle unless they've come to you for their inventory first. The auditing organization, even just reaching out and saying, we'd like to understand your challenges. Risk management, again, it's the same thing. Dan, the way I approach it is I look at org charts. And you don't necessarily want to go to the top of the house, but find a common denominator that you have. If you're using some of the collaborative, I lovingly refer to it as Facebook for internal corporation. Yammer, there we go. If you have Yammer, engage in some of those channels. Look for problems or look for where folks are communicating challenges. Reach out to them. I think a lot of times what I've realized is folks just don't know that we have cultivated sets of data. Introduce them to the HopeX 360. If you can see this there, if you demo that, if you demonstrate, here's what we do have in IT, and you make that generally available, or even do a quarterly IT communication, bring it out to the business. They're going to start coming back into you as well. They don't know what we have in IT.
Great. There's a question from the audience. What do you think of AI's role in ITGC automation?
It's a trick question. Well, without solid data, AI is going to be troublesome. Mega is your enabler, right, for that solid data set. But we always have to, when we think about IT general controls, we're articulating not only the control itself and its relationship, and we know that those need to be applied against our applications, technologies, and our business processes. So when we look at and we define those high level business processes, we will be able to, given quality data, use AI to say, show me this scenario, or use machine learning to say, find an anti-pattern for me. Example, let's say all of your critical applications, you can run an assessment and you can look at the quality of the data on that record, bounce it against your control testing, but you're always going to have 10%. Maybe it's an 80-20 principle. That 20% principle is going to catch you. That's what you need to solve for. So when we think about ITGC automation, it's stepping into already taking the apps, the portfolios that you've structured, you tie your controls to it, and now perform your control testing. So you start to see that holistic view. These are your good applications that are adhering to those standards, and then your bad monkeys can be put in a cage off to the side. And then we mitigate them, right, with incidents or action plans to really ensure they understand why we need them to adhere to this. Again, the complexity comes into play with these cloud deployments. It's like everybody wants to go to the cloud, but the cloud is a marketing term. Some are, it's solutions, right? Or it's software applications. Then you've got infrastructure. Well, infrastructure is no different than a data center, and you have to have controls and you have to manage that differently. How do you bounce IT general controls across that? The same way you did in a traditional data center deployment. But again, it's building the data, working with the multiple disciplines. That's a great question.
Great. I've got one more just to follow on from the initial question. So if I look through the org charts and I find some commonality where, for example, you identify a group that can benefit from data that you have that they don't know you have, what do you take to that first conversation to illustrate the value of that data?
I call mine the big data map. Um,
Okay.
we call it HopeX 360, right? What I try to do is really bring those holistic views and bring the views and focus in on what you know today and how you perform your function. And when you stumble into a problem, how do you address it? When you know that there's a 0-day release or you've got a critical vulnerability, how do you demonstrate not only the infrastructure it's sitting on, but your upstream and downstream dependencies? It's a mystery as far as our business partners are often, you know, when they think of us, they're just like, it's wizardry. I'll never understand it. I'll never understand the language. Paint pictures, painting pictures and starting at that 50,000 foot. Hey, here's where we are. You're kind of over here. It really helps folks to understand, oh gosh, there's a whole ecosystem here. And this ecosystem is constantly being refined and trying to be optimized because the one thing that's changing at a velocity that even our machines can't keep up with, right, is technology. So you can imagine the fatigue that business resources are faced, especially, you know, those that are accustomed to working in Excel. And now we're saying, hey, we need you to use Power BI. And by the way, we don't want you to download it to Excel, even though you're really comfortable doing that. Um, it's really bridging that divide and helping them step through.
Excellent. Well, with that, I just thank everybody for attending today. Tara, appreciate the insight and sharing it with our client base. And we look forward to future conversations that I'm sure we'll have and future successes as well. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. And that's the end of today's session.
Thank you all.